Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess, obsession, and pleasure. Born from the downfall of the entire Eldar Empire, the Dark Prince embodies every desire taken one step too far. Unlike Khorne, who just wants your skull, Slaanesh wants everything else. Your mind, your soul, your desires, your addictions, and worst of all, your weird search history.
I'm not going to judge your journey. It is your fantasy, just as long as you... Wow! Okay!
Today I'm continuing my mini-series, where I'll be checking out all 4 Chaos Gods, and breaking down just how powerful they really are in the current setting. By the end of the month, I'll rank them all from weakest to strongest based on their current strength in the 42nd millennia. But in today's video, we're covering Scandelous Slaanesh, the Ketamine King. I'll be going over who Slaanesh is, then I'll discuss her weapons, abilities, and feats, before finally scaling her against the rest of the Warhammer 40k universe. So as always, my beloved herd, let's jump straight into the cowhole. It may be time for power scaling, but because it's Mr. or I guess Miss Slaanesh's day, let's mix things up yet again. Children of the Emperor, death to his foes. Slaanesh is the chaos god of lust, greed, excess, pain, pleasure, perfection, and hedonism. Basically every desire taken so far beyond reason that it loops around into horror. If you guys have seen the movie Obsession, Slaanesh is pretty much Freaky Nikki. Except she's not a 5'2" small girl that's trying to make you fall in love with her, but she's actually the warp's greatest manifestation of excess and obsession.
No.
What?
No, don't do that!
So if you wish that Slaanesh would fall in love with you, damn, you're pretty much screwed.
Okay, we are cooked.
Of the 4 major chaos gods, Slaanesh was the last to be born, coming into existence during the cataclysmic collapse of the Eldar race in the event known as the Fall. Slaanesh was fully born in that exact moment, and the consequences for the galaxy were truly horrific. The birth of the Dark Prince tore a permanent hole in reality and created the Eye of Terror, a warp scar so massive it still splits the galaxy today. But this was just the start. It only gets worse from there. The mere echoes of Slaanesh's birth cry devoured the souls of most of the Eldar race, with only those far enough away from the Eldar core worlds, or those protected inside the webway managing to escape. Billions died in an instant as the race that had accidentally created a god immediately paid the price for their own excess. And in the book The Fist of Demetrius, we get one of the most horrifying descriptions of what Slaanesh's birth actually looked like, from an Eldar point of view. The day arrived, the sky split. On 1,000 worlds, the god appeared and looked down on his people and smiled. And they screamed, for they saw at the last the visage of the being they worshipped, and they were afraid. Their screams lasted but an instant, for the newborn god breathed in, and their souls were sucked from their bodies and drawn into his maw. With every soul devoured, the god grew in power and strength. It became harder and harder for those who resisted to endure. Starting with the weaker souls, he gained strength until not even the mightiest could stand against the strain. The worst of it was that even as they died and were devoured, their screams of terror turned to screams of ecstasy. Hearing these, those who resisted no longer, and the mad scramble to escape doom became willing submission to it. Bodies fell in the street, drained of spirit and animation, as the demon god fed. The streets of the city became filled with corpses, ships fell from the sky, no longer piloted, vehicles slewed off roads as their drivers were absorbed into the presence of the newborn deity. In moments, stillness settled on the city as all of its inhabitants died and were transformed into part of the new entity. That's one pretty metal way to enter the setting. But Slaanesh didn't just eat billions of Eldar souls. She also hunted down and devoured the entire Eldar pantheon, with only a few exceptions. Cain, who resisted long enough to be shattered into countless pieces, Kegarak, the laughing god, who escaped into the webway, and Isha, who was taken captive by the plague god Nurgle. So in one single moment, Slaanesh annihilated an empire, consumed untold billions of souls, shattered a pantheon of gods, and created one of the largest warp catastrophes in galactic history. Not so bad for a debut. But the weirdest thing about Slaanesh's birth is that according to the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex, that's only how these events look from the perspective of the material universe. In the warp, linear time doesn't work the same way. And so cause and effect don't happen in neat little sequences. As the Chaos Gods themselves reckon it, Slaanesh has always existed, and yet has never existed at all. Yeah, the warp is just weird like that. Slaanesh, much like the other Chaos Gods, is not simply a god in the traditional sense. The Dark Prince is a vast psychic intelligence, born from the collective thoughts, desires, emotions, and excesses of sentient beings reflected into the warp. As described in the Warhammer 40k Ultimate Guide, the warp is not a placid realm. Like a churning sea, it has tides and waves, currents and eddies. The smallest disturbance, the flickering of a soul, may not change the course of these great flows, but over time, the mass of mortals and their base emotions have created raging torrents and unending storms. For millions of years, the accumulation of mortal desires and fears have formed into pools of consciousness. These pools are impossibly vast and unknowable, and yet they are forged in the minds of mortals and connected to them through their souls. They are the great powers of the warp, and they hunger after the real universe, desiring dominion over it just as they desire superiority over one another. So yeah, Slaanesh specifically is the embodiment of excess, obsession, indulgence, perfectionism, and desire taken far beyond all reason. The Dark Prince is empowered whenever mortals surrender themselves to these extremes, such as a noble consumed by luxury, a warrior obsessed with becoming the perfect swordsman, an artist willing to sacrifice everything for that perfect masterpiece, a ruler driven by vanity, an addict chasing the next high. All of these feed Slaanesh. And that's what makes the Dark Prince so terrifying. While Khorne is empowered by rage and bloodshed, Nurgle by despair and stagnation, Tzeentch by ambition and change, Slaanesh can feed upon almost any pursuit taken to an unhealthy extreme. In fact, in the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex, it is noted that any obsession of any of the other Chaos Gods can ultimately empower Slaanesh. Last in the pantheon is Slaanesh, who knows well how to play on the obsessions of his rivals. Khorne's single-minded bloodlust, Nurgle's quest to infect every living thing, and Tzeentch's compulsion to dabble in the fates of all mortals. All are obsessions which the Lord of Excess can turn to his will with a whispered promise. Which implies that one day, Slaanesh may indeed become the greatest Chaos God since every act empowers her. Now before I move on, I touched on this briefly during my Khorne video, so I'll briefly touch on it here. Are the Chaos Gods actually sentient beings, or are they just concepts in the warp? And the answer appears to be both, as according to the 6th edition Chaos Demons Codex, the Chaos Gods were formed from the accumulated emotions, desires, thoughts, and beliefs of all sentient life. As these psychic energies flowed through the warp over countless millennia, they gathered together and eventually became self-aware entities. In the warp, similar thoughts and emotions gather together, rivulets of water running down a cliff face. They form streams and eddies of anguish and desire, pools of hatred and torrents of pride. Since the dawn of time, these tides and waves have flowed unceasingly through the mere realm of the warp. And such is their power that they form creatures made of the very stuff of unreality. Eventually, these instinctual, formless beings gained a rudimentary consciousness. The Chaos Gods were born, vast psychic presences made of the fantasies and horrors of mortals. These are the ruinous powers, and each is a reflection of the mortal passions that formed them. As the races of the galaxies prospered and grew, so too did their hopes and dreams, their rage and wars, their love and hatred. Their burgeoning flood of raw emotion fed the Chaos Gods and nurtured their power. Eventually, the gods reached back into and through the dreams of mortals, eternally working to influence the physical realm and its myriad races. This idea is reinforced in the book Wrath and Glory, which describes the Chaos Gods as possessing their own intelligence and will, while simultaneously being fundamental principles of the warp itself. In other words, they are not simply sentient beings with unlimited power, nor are they mindless forces of nature. They are just both at the same time, as each possesses a conscious will and personality. Yet, each is also shackled to the emotions, desires, and thoughts that created it. Khorne can't stop making war and violence. Slaanesh can't stop embodying excess and obsession. Tzeentch can't stop scheming, and Nurgle can't stop being decay and stagnation. So while they are thinking beings in some sense, they're not free in the way mortals are. They are vast, psychic intelligences born from mortal emotion, forever bound to the concepts that created them. In many ways, they are less like people and more like living cosmic laws, self-aware storms of thought and feeling that have grown powerful enough to shape reality itself. And although Slaanesh may be a vast, metaphysical being within the warp, but the Dark Prince is often described with a physical form when manifesting. And according to the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex, Slaanesh is said to be unlike any of the other Chaos Gods in this regard. Of all of the Chaos Gods, Slaanesh alone is divinely glamorous, long-limbed and elegant, with a haunting, androgynous beauty. Some say that Slaanesh can assume male, female, or hermaphrodite form at will. He usually manifests himself as a young man, clean-limbed and fresh with the vigor of youth. Indeed, Slaanesh is seductive, as only an immortal can be, disarming in his innocence, utterly beguiling in his manner. Some say that it is impossible for mortals to look upon that divine face without losing their soul. For all who see it become willing slaves to every whim of the Dark Prince, embracing his ways with wild abandon. And that kind of fits Slaanesh perfectly. While Khorne is described as monstrous and enraged, or Nurgle as bloated and decaying, Slaanesh manifests as temptation itself. Beauty so perfect, so unnatural, and so overwhelmingly alluring that simply gazing upon the Dark Prince can damn a mortal soul. Slaanesh's realm in the warp is centered around the Palace of Pleasure, a nightmarish domain of temptation and excess that lies at the very heart of the Dark Prince's territory, as seen in the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex. Slaanesh's realm is divided into 6 domains, arranged in concentric rings about the Palace of Pleasure. Each of these is a celebration of Slaanesh's desires, and while they might be mistaken for paradises, nothing in the lands of the Dark Prince is as it seems. An intruder can only reach the Palace of Pleasure in the very heart of Slaanesh's territory by passing through all 6 circles, an act of will beyond most souls, both mortal and demon. So essentially, Slaanesh's domain is specifically designed to break a traveler by exploiting their deepest desires and weaknesses. The first circle tempts intruders with unimaginable riches, treasures beyond the dreams of kings. Gems, gold, and wealth lie everywhere, but those who take from the riches are devoured from within by demons, who then wear their victims' skins like trophies. The second circle presents vast feasts, endless rivers of wine, and banquets fit for gods. But anyone who takes even a single bite or sip becomes trapped in an endless indulgence, gorging themselves until their soul collapses under the strain. The third circle offers beauty, pleasure, and seductive demonettes amid radiant fields of light. But beneath the illusion lies claws, teeth, and predatory horror waiting to consume the unwary. The fourth circle appeals to ambition and power. Travelers are greeted by cheering armies, adoring crowds, and lords heaping praise upon them, tempting them with glory and authority, only for that praise to become a prison if they linger too long. The fifth circle is filled with mirrored pools, beautiful gardens, and visions of everything a traveler wishes they could be. Voices whisper of greatness and past achievements, drawing the prideful ever deeper until they are lost in their own vanity. And finally, the sixth circle offers perfumed seas, pristine beaches, heavenly choirs, and the promise of perfect rest. But those who give in and sleep never awaken, their dried corpses becoming part of the sands themselves. And beyond all of this lies the Palace of Pleasure, the luxurious seat of Slaanesh. where the Dark Prince resides. His halls filled with debauched contests and 6 great halls, each dedicated to one of Slaanesh's eternal seductions. Essentially, if you go in, you're not coming out. Just like the Lotus Casino from Percy Jackson. But probably a tad bit more deadly.
That's really good.
A few moments later.
When it comes to the other Chaos Gods, Slaanesh tends to have a more neutral attitude than you might expect. The Dark Prince is often so wrapped in his own obsession, pleasures, and endless pursuit of sensation that rivalries and alliances aren't always a top priority. But that said, Slaanesh does have one major enemy among the Chaos Pantheon: Khorne, the Blood God. As the two gods are fundamentally opposed in both philosophy and nature. Khorne embodies rage, slaughter, pain, and violence, while Slaanesh represents excess in all things. Khorne despises Slaanesh's pursuit of gratification, seeing it as weak and self-indulgent, while Slaanesh views Khorne as crude, brutish, and utterly lacking in refinement. In simple terms, it pretty much boils down to Slaanesh doesn't like that Khorne doesn't do enough ketamine, while Khorne doesn't like that Slaanesh doesn't take a bunch of skulls. So as you can see, they're at an impasse. Now the worship of Slaanesh is of course defined by excess and the devotion to sensation in all its forms. Followers of the Dark Prince rarely display Slaanesh's symbol openly, instead favoring subtle expressions through luxury, aesthetic, and erotic motifs, worked into jewelry and personal adornment. Even outside of formal rites, devotees maintain an appearance of refined, extravagant quality, adapting their styles to prevailing fashions while always emphasizing beauty, allure, and excess. And Slaanesh's most infamous champions reflect this philosophy. Among them is Fulgrim, demon primarch of the Emperor's Children, who is one of the saddest falls I've seen in my cow life. There's also Lucius the Eternal, the once proud captain of the 3rd Legion, now cursed to live and kill endlessly in Slaanesh's name, Eidolon, the Lord Commander Primus, Doomrider, a demon prince whose existence is defined by reckless excess and terrible driving, Shalaxi Hellbane, a powerful keeper of secrets known for hunting down and defeating rival greater demons. There's also the Mask, who embodies Slaanesh's themes of eternal performance and unattainable perfection, Nakari, who is either a demon prince or a greater demon, depending on the lore you're reading, and who also defeated Oserman, the Phoenix Lord. Each of these characters represent a different facet of Slaanesh's dominion, from seduction and artistry to violence and obsession. So now that we know who Slaanesh is, it's time to move in to the real meat of this video. Her weapons, abilities, and most importantly, her feats across 40k. Now surprisingly, or I guess not really that surprising, since she, or I guess he, is the youngest Chaos God, Slaanesh doesn't actually have a massive amount of direct feats compared to the other Chaos Gods.
And you were only gonna pay me 30? You're getting 30 grand? I'm getting 1,000!
But you guys are getting paid?
But alas, I shall do my best with the lore out there. First off, this may seem like a slight repetition. Slaanesh is the Chaos God most closely associated with pleasure, lust, excess, obsession, perfectionism, and hedonism. The Dark Prince was formed from the psychic reflections of these desires within the warp, and continues to draw power from them whenever they manifest among sentient beings. To add to that, it appears that Slaanesh is empowered by these desires and emotions across all time, space, and reality, as the Chaos Gods themselves are implied to be multiversal beings. As I discussed in my Khorne video, there are several references throughout Warhammer 40k lore that suggest that the Chaos Gods extend beyond a single reality, and instead exist everywhere where the warp is present. For example, in the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex, the Hound of Khorne, Karnak, is stated to hunt his prey from one end of the multiverse to the other across time and space, which very clearly implies the existence of a 40k multiverse. Now, I'm not saying that this is like Marvel, and you have a bunch of random people from a bunch of random multiverses interacting with one another. No, that's not happening. We don't have the Emperor and 30k magically popping up to form some form of Avengers to take down the Chaos Gods. Thank God, 40k does not have the terrible writers that Marvel has. So Slaanesh is empowered across all realities, time, and space, by emotions and actions tied to excess and obsession. But, as I discussed earlier, it also appears that aspects of the other Chaos Gods may indirectly empower Slaanesh as well, as seen in the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex. The fact that the most typical hierarchy of power between the 4 Chaos Gods sees Slaanesh at the bottom, even if they feel the magnetic pull of his matchless charisma and are both attracted and repelled by their younger brother. This is due in part to the fact that all the Chaos Gods embody the excess for which Slaanesh is known. Khorne with his bloodlust, Tzeentch with his scheming, and Nurgle with his spreading of plague. Each is an obsession that the Dark Prince can turn to his will with merely a whispered promise. Lurking deep within the psyche of each of his brothers is the suspicion that the influence of the Dark Prince is rapidly growing, and that Slaanesh will perhaps one day eclipse them all in strength. With this thought in mind, any alliance of convenience with Slaanesh is especially short-lived. While this could be attributed simply to distrust of one who changes sides at a whim, there is an argument that the Dark Prince's rivals fear the secret power he holds over them. This passage is honestly kind of insane, because it heavily implies that Slaanesh's influence extends even to the other Chaos Gods themselves. Not only does it reinforce the idea that Slaanesh is empowered by excess in all forms, but it also suggests that Khorne's rage, Tzeentch's endless scheming, and Nurgle's obsession with decay all indirectly feed into the Dark Prince's domain. That codex even outright states that the other Dark Gods are simultaneously attracted to and repelled by Slaanesh's charisma, which is honestly hilarious and both terrifying at the same time. In addition to this, that same codex states that simply gazing upon Slaanesh can utterly shatter a being's mind, driving them into acts of unimaginable indulgence, obsession, and hedonism beyond their wildest dreams. Slaanesh can also create illusions so powerful that victims perceive them as reality. And as we just discussed, people, these temptations and manipulations may even affect the Chaos Gods themselves to some extent. Wow, that's pretty damn cool. Horrifying, but still pretty damn cool. Now, outside of Slaanesh's specific seductive, temptation, and corruptive abilities, the Dark Prince, like the other Chaos Gods, also possesses immense control over the warp itself, as Slaanesh can manipulate the realm of chaos according to his own will and imagination, as seen in the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex. The realm of chaos is a place of dreams and nightmares, where cause, not need, follow effect. Within its bounds, anything is possible. Here, there are no physical laws akin to those that dominate the mortal world. Within its confines, hopes and fears become real and reality is reborn as fevered hallucination. Gravity, shape, space, and reason all are in flux and utterly mutable to the will of the Chaos Gods. Few mortals are capable of perceiving the realm of chaos in true splendor, for the living mind recoils from its otherworldly landscapes. Thus, no two visions of the realm of chaos are exactly alike, and are often contradictory. So just like the other Chaos Gods, Slaanesh can also manipulate the warp on a conceptual level, meaning gravity, shape, space, logic, and reality are completely susceptible to his will, implying he can alter these things however he desires within the immaterium. This also correlates with the statements from the 10th edition Chaos Demons Codex, which describes the Chaos Gods' battles as shaking the warp and tearing open massive rifts into reality for their armies to spill forth, implying that they stand as the dominant power within the warp by a vast margin. But that's not all, folks. Slaanesh can also manipulate something known as the Skein. For those who are wondering what the hell the Skein is, well, according to Path of the Seer, it is essentially a structure of fate and possibility where past, present, and the future exist as overlapping threads rather than a single fixed timeline. It is described as a state beneath physical reality, a place of pure thought, potential, and becoming, where being, passing, and life emerge before form truly takes shape. In essence, the skein is not simply the future, but the underlying web of reality and possibility made up of infinite branching outcomes perceived by psychic beings as threads or strands. Just like I said in my corn video, a good way to imagine this is that the Chaos Gods have metaphorical strings attached to the skein. They can pull, strain, twist, and manipulate the threads of possibility in order to nudge reality towards outcomes that benefit them. But they can't simply rewrite fate without resistance. Every movement is contested by the complexity of the skein, as well as by rival chaos gods, demons, psychic beings, and other warp entities, all fighting over the same web of fate. For Slaanesh specifically, the Dark Prince influences the skein by amplifying desires, temptations, obsessions, vanity, addiction, perfectionism, and indulgence already present within mortal souls. Futures where civilizations collapse into decadence, where individuals become consumed by obsession, or where temptation overrides reason becomes increasingly likely under Slaanesh's influence. In an era where countless beings across the galaxy are driven by greed, excess, vanity, addiction, and endless desire, this gives Slaanesh immense leverage over the flow of fate. Every soul consumed by obsession strengthens the Dark Prince, and in turn, that growing power allows Slaanesh to pull the skein even further towards futures defined by excess, corruption, and self-indulgence, creating an endless self-feeding cycle of temptation and ruin. Now, as a Chaos God, even with all of these absurd powers and reality warping abilities, Slaanesh still can't exactly just stroll directly into the material universe whenever she wants, as the sheer scale of a Chaos God's existence is simply too vast for real space to properly contain. So instead, Slaanesh breaks off a fragment of her own essence to create a smaller being that is able to enter the physical world, to carry out her will, spread corruption, and wage war in her name. This is how the process is described in the 10th edition Chaos Demons Codex. The Chaos Gods are not alone in warp space. They have created servants from their own essences, the creatures mortals call demons. Demons are beings of a somewhat different nature to their masters, and are the most numerous of the warp's inhabitants. A demon is born when a Chaos God expends a portion of its power to create a separate being. This power binds a collection of senses, thoughts, and purposes together, creating a personality and consciousness that can move within the warp. The Chaos Gods can reclaim the independence it has given to its minions at any time. This ensures their continuing loyalty, and means, although some wayward demons may not act entirely in accordance with their master's commands, even the greatest of them would not dare outright defiance. So essentially, Slaanesh can shadow clone herself, creating fragments of her own power, given unique personalities, appearances, and purposes that act as extensions of the Dark Prince within reality. These demons can appear as lesser entities like demonettes, or powerful heralds of Slaanesh, or as terrifying greater demons, known as Keepers of Secrets, each varying massively in size and strength depending on how much of Slaanesh's essence was used in their creation. But the most important thing here is that the Codex directly states that these demons are infinitely lesser than the Chaos Gods that spawned them. No matter how powerful a Keeper of Secrets or Demon Prince appears, they are still merely a tiny fragment of Slaanesh's true power. In other words, every demon of Slaanesh is essentially just a smaller shard of the Dark Prince running around in reality causing problems for just about everyone. So those are Slaanesh's abilities, and honestly they're pretty much what you'd expect from a Chaos God. But now we get to Slaanesh's weapon. And it's a little awkward because unlike Khorne, Slaanesh doesn't actually appear to possess some famous super weapon. Khorne has Woebringer, which can cut through reality and shatter moons. But Slaanesh doesn't really have an equivalent iconic weapon. But to be fair, that kinda makes sense for the Dark Prince of Pleasure. While Khorne is a god built around direct violence, slaughter, and combat, so naturally it does make sense that he carries a giant universe-ending weapon. Because subtlety is apparently illegal in his domain. You see what I did there? I like to call that cornception. Yep, that's cornception for you.
Oh my god! Wow!
Slaanesh, though, doesn't really conquer through brute force, as the Dark Prince's greatest weapon is temptation, obsession, corruption, and manipulation. Slaanesh destroys civilizations less by smashing them apart with a giant axe, and more by convincing them to willingly destroy themselves from the inside out. That's not to say Slaanesh is incapable of violence. Far from it. Keepers of Secrets wield enormous Hellforged blades, whips, and claws that can tear apart even the strongest warriors. Some of them even have a mysterious fluid on it, which apparently empowers them in some way. I'm not kidding, a Keeper of Secrets was able to defeat Marneus Calgar because of some mysterious liquid on the tip of its blade. Don't ask me what that liquid is, because I really don't want to know. Demon weapons, blessed by Slaanesh, can drive mortals insane with sensation or corrupt their souls with a single strike. I mean, for example, you guys probably even remember the Alair Blade, the sword that was even able to possess a Primarch. But unlike Khorne, whose identity is deeply tied to martial prowess and weaponry, Slaanesh's arsenal is more abstract and psychological. The Dark Prince pretty much weaponizes desire. In many ways, Slaanesh's greatest weapon is the fact that people often don't realize they've already lost until it's far too late. Khorne will kick down your front door screaming, while Slaanesh will convince you to open it willingly. With Slaanesh's lack of an arsenal out of the way, we can finally move on to her feats. And where better to start than the very moment of her birth, and the destruction of the entire Eldar race and their pantheon, as seen in the 8th edition Craftworld's Codex. At the moment of its birth, Slaanesh decimated the Eldar pantheon and stole the gods' power, with only 2 of their number surviving the fall. The laughing god Kegarak escaped through guile, while Cain, the strongest and most warlike of the Eldari deities, endured through might. Slaanesh and the bloody-handed god fought a titanic battle in the warp, and despite Cain's mastery of war, Slaanesh, glutted with stolen power, eventually proved the stronger. Exhausted from the struggle, Slaanesh could not destroy the Eldari god completely. Instead, Cain was rent into fragments. Each shard came to rest within the Wraithbone core of a craft world, where it took root and grew into an avatar of the bloody-handed god. Yeah, so Slaanesh basically wiped out the entire Eldar pantheon, and based on the lore, most of them didn't even put up a meaningful fight, which is both a great showing for Slaanesh, and just goes to show how weakened the Eldari pantheon was at the time of their fall. Then came her battle against Cain. And even though this version of Cain is already weakened like the rest of the Eldar pantheon at the time of the fall, he still managed to put up a great fight against the Dark Prince. But despite wielding Anaris, the greatest sword created by Vol, Slaanesh still ultimately prevailed. But the battle was so close that the Dark Prince was exhausted and could not fully consume Cain, instead shattering him into smaller fragments that would go on to become the avatars of Cain found across the craft worlds. But this isn't the only interpretation we have of this fight, as there are several variations across established canon, and I feel like I would be doing a disservice to all you 40k fans out there by not bringing them up. For example, we have this excerpt, which depicts their fight very differently. This is from The Rise of the Ynnari, Ghost Warrior. Here myth is conflicted, and the sagas of one craft world differ from the epics of another, as much as they differ again from the folktales of Kamun Ra, and the dances of the disparate Harlequin mass. Some say that she who thirst tried to consume Cain, but in struggling from her grip, the bloody-handed one shredded into many parts, and the tatters of his existence fluttered down into the universe of mortals. Some say that Cain was always the son of the great enemy and the Lord of Skulls, their twain desires of glory and bloodshed matched within his breast. The elevation of the doom of the Eldari was too much and broke apart his immortal frame, scattering bloody parts into the cosmos. And there are those that claim the Brass King and She Who Thirst fought openly for possession of the bloody-handed, and in the struggle Cain was split asunder and flaming fragments of his being were released into reality. So pretty much older lore presents multiple conflicting mythical accounts of Kane's shattering. Whether it was Slaanesh alone, whether Kane tore himself apart escaping, or whether Khorne and Slaanesh fought over him. However, I'm more keen to believe that the modern version, from the 8th and now the 10th edition Eldari codexes, present the more clear and consistent version, where Kane and Slaanesh had a high diff fight, which resulted in Kane being shattered, which I think is generally treated as primary canon. At that point in time, at the moment of her birth, Slaanesh would have been probably the strongest Chaos God or near to it, possessed the stolen power of multiple Eldari gods, but empowered by billions upon billions of Eldar souls, and defeated a weakened Kane even while he wielded Aneris, Vol's greatest weapon. Slaanesh is really off to a hot start. But beyond her birth, Slaanesh also has the feat of participating in the Great Game, the eternal conflict between the Chaos Gods, where she has, at a minimum, been able to hold her own without being erased by Nurgle, Khorne, or Tzeentch. In the Great Game, alliances are constantly formed and broken in this endless war, but still Slaanesh remains an active contender within it. On the subject of the Great Game, the 8th edition Chaos Demons Codex notes that if the Chaos Gods had acted in unison during the formation and the aftermath of the Great Rift, they may have been able to destroy reality. Had the Chaos Gods worked in unison in the wake of that terrible event, it is doubtless that real space would have been utterly consumed by the sprawling madness of the warp. Yet true to their nature, the Dark Brothers saw the anarchy as an opportunity to fulfill their own agendas, to kill, to change, to pollute, to bathe in excess. So divided, they are unable to overcome the fierce resistance of the galaxy's inhabitants. This strongly implies that the Chaos Gods possess the power to end reality, restrained only by their own eternal conflict, which I assume you guys already knew. Despite this immense theoretical power, the Great Game is constantly shifting, and while Slaanesh is not ever really consistently portrayed as a dominant victor.
Ah, well, that's disappointing. I needed that boost today.
In fact, shortly after her birth, the 8th edition Codex describes how the Chaos Gods immediately turn their full attention to the Great Game. Glutted upon the souls of the Eldari, the Dark Prince expands his domain. Such a bold move is met with great opposition, and the Chaos Gods turn their attention fully to the Great Game. Meanwhile, Tzeentch allies with Nurgle and Slaanesh to gain ascendancy over Khorne, yet it is short-lived. The Blood God's immense rage at being usurped leads to him to reclaim his lost territory and more besides. So even while being empowered by the Eldar souls and the entire Eldari pantheon, she still has to ally with Nurgle and Tzeentch to fight Khorne. And even then, it's only a temporary victory. Now you could make the argument that Slaanesh was already weakened from her fight against Kane, since the text does say that she was exhausted, which I think is honestly a fair and definitely plausible argument. To add to that, thankfully, we get more context on this war between the alliance of loser gods and the Chad Khorne in that same codex. Sorry for the obscene amount of excerpts in this video, but I'm going absolutely balls to the walls with the research here. At the zenith of one of the Blood Gods' reigns of dominance in the Great Game, Tzeentch encourages Nurgle to invade the realm of his brother Khorne, assuring him that both his own legions and those of Slaanesh would aid him. Tzeentchian illusions drew many blood legions away, rendering Khorne's armies vulnerable. So great were the Blood God's losses that his minions were pushed back to the very walls of the Brass Citadel. Now I will admit, Khorne would have lost, it appears, if not for a stray spark from a Herald of Tzeentch igniting Nurgle's garden, which then had spread to the Brass Citadel, resulting in a massive inferno that wiped out both Nurgle and Slaanesh's armies, and allowed Khorne to repel the invasion. I'm not kidding, this is literally what the Skulllands excerpt describes. Maybe Tzeentch was up to something there. He is the great schemer after all. But regardless, it still shows that even with two allies backing her up, Slaanesh was dangerously close to toppling Khorne, who was the Ascendant Chaos God at that time. But even at the brink of defeat, the Chad Khorne is still stated to have recovered, and even went on to reclaim his lost territory and more afterwards, implying he returned to being the top dog in the Great Game once again.
I don't make mistakes. I'm not just like the rest of you. I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better. I am better!
Yeah, this 8th edition codex really glazes the hell out of the Blood God. And if I was writing it, I would too.
This one is fully functional. This one is a disappointment.
But unlike Khorne, it gets worse for Slaanesh. Yes, even worse, as according to that same edition, Slaanesh loses not only to Khorne, but Nurgle as well, at some point during the Great Game. During the eternal wranglings and wars that make up the Great Game, it came about that Tzeentch tricked Slaanesh into an unwinnable battle against both Khorne and Nurgle, the ill-fated Provocation Wars. It was a hard-fought series of campaigns that ended only with the Dark Prince's utter defeat and subsequent humiliation. So this seems to retcon the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex, which previously had stated that Slaanesh had only lost to Khorne. But now it makes it even worse for the Dark Prince by stating that she also lost to Nurgle, and in both cases was humiliated. Now, this new codex does imply that Slaanesh was fighting both at once, making it slightly better for the Dark Prince, but still a pretty bad feat. On the lighter side, Slaanesh does have some victories. It's not all bad. For example, alongside Nurgle and Khorne, Slaanesh also fought Tzeentch when he ruled over all of creation, and helped the 2 other Chaos Gods defeat him. This upscales Slaanesh pretty significantly, since it's very impressive even for 3 Chaos Gods to face down this version of Tzeentch. Since, as I just said, the Purple Nurple at this point in time ruled over all creation and the Warp. Then we also have this feat from the 8th edition, which discusses a corrupted rogue trader who began a mining operation after discovering valuable gemstones on a distant world. However, after creating coinage from the precious rocks he uncovered, disaster quickly followed. As Apollyon's moon eclipses Rubia's sun, all those who have shared in his greed are suddenly filled with an insatiable cannibalistic hunger, leaving those who succumb to it open to demon possession. An astropathic cry for aid reaches the Imperium, and the Grey Knights arrive in strength to save Rubia itself from armies of once human invaders. The rest of the system falls to anarchy, however, as Slaanesh claims his due. So we see here that Slaanesh doesn't even necessarily need to directly manifest in order for planets or even entire systems to fall to her corruption and influence. Simply indulging in greed and excess was enough to spiritually open these people to the Dark Prince's influence, eventually resulting in them spiraling into madness, cannibalism, demon possession, and full societal collapse. And honestly, this probably happens thousands of times across the Imperium. The galaxy is so massive and human corruption is so common that most Slaaneshi infections likely never even get recorded. This is just one of the few major examples the lore specifically focuses on, but it really does highlight how dangerous Slaanesh really is. So that is Slaanesh. She can manipulate the Immaterium, corrupt minds and souls, influence fate through the skein, create endless armies of demons from fragments of her own essence, and feeds endlessly off excess, obsession, and desire across all reality, time, and space. She does not wield a weapon, nor does she really need to, as she can use her corrupting influence to have civilizations destroy themselves from within. And her feats do back it up. Slaanesh was born from the collapse of the Eldari Empire, devoured most of their pantheon, defeated a weakened Khaine-wielding Anaris, consumed billions of Eldar souls, and actively competes in the Great Game against the other Chaos Gods. But now comes the real question. Where exactly does all of this place Slaanesh within the wider scale of 40k? Well folks, it's everyone's favorite part of the video. It's time to finally start power scaling. Now, as always, before we talk about Slaanesh specifically, we need to lay out the almighty, the fabulous, the best part of this entire video, a cow's power pyramid. Now, I will say that since the last video, I've made some adjustments to the pyramid after talking with my beloved cows in my Discord. And while the previous version worked pretty well, I think this one is far more accurate to the 40k setting. At the bottom, we've got the Chapter Master tier. This is where you'll find your standard Orc War bosses, Eldar Exarchs, and your Space Marine Chapter Masters. Above that is the Enhanced tier, and here we have some real changes. First, we have your standard Adeptus Custodes, the gene-enhanced warriors of the Emperor of Mankind. Then we have the Swarm Lord, the supposed pinnacle of the Hive Mind, who apparently is a giant fraud. And then at the top of the Enhanced tier, we have Greater Demons and Demon Princes, depending on how empowered they are by the Ruinous Pantheon. After that comes the Low Primarch tier. And I do need to clarify something before I continue, since some people got confused last time. When I say base Primarch, I'm not talking about AMP versions like Lionel Johnson in their current setting with the Emperor's Shield, or Sanguinius during the Siege of Terra, who basically can't die until he fights Horus. I'm talking about the Primarchs at the height of the Great Crusade, when they are unamped, unaltered, and at their normal baseline, hence the word base. The low Primarch tier includes beings like the Avatar of Cain and the weaker base Primarchs, like Lorgar, Alfarius, Omegon, and Rebute Gilliman. After that, we have the high Primarch tier, where we find the absolute monsters among the base Primarchs, like Sanguinius, the Lion, Horus, Leman Russ, Conrad Kurz, Angron, and Fulgrim. After that, we reach the planetary tier, which includes Transcendent Catan Shards and the Demon Primarchs. These are beings who can destroy or threaten entire worlds. Above that is the cosmic tier, where we find entities like the Silent King and the Emperor during 30k. These are beings who operate on a galactic or metaphysical scale far beyond even the Primarchs. Finally, at the very top, we reach the multiversal tier, the absolute peak of Warhammer 40k. This is where you find God Emperor Horus, the Emperor on the Golden Throne, the fully formed Catan, and of course, the Chaos Gods. These are beings whose influence stretches across realities, timelines, and the very structure of existence. And with all of that established, it's finally time to see where Slaanesh truly sits in the hierarchy of 40k. Well, just like Khorne, we've kinda got the exact same situation going for us. Slaanesh has obvious reality, skiing, and warp manipulation. She also exists and affects multiple realities at the same time. So by that logic, she should immediately fit in the multiversal tier, which I'm already sensing is going to be a recurring problem with the Chaos Pantheon. But what can you do? What can you do? So yes, Slaanesh should immediately scale above everything in the Chapter Master, Enhanced, Primarch, Planetary, and Cosmic tiers. But now we need to figure out where exactly does Slaanesh sit in the multiversal tier. Because here we're dealing with the Thronebound Emperor, God Emperor Horus, the other Chaos Gods, and of course, the full-on Catan. Let's start with the Bald Menace, Horus Lubercal. Even though he is immensely powerful with abilities like manipulating reality, time, space, and even the skiing, he is still fundamentally a child being handed godlike power he doesn't fully understand. He's basically a mortal consciousness overloaded with fragments of chaos divinity, and he doesn't grasp the true extent of what he's wielding. On top of that, he's only a sliver of the true Chaos God's power, a droplet, not the source. Meanwhile, Slaanesh is the full conceptual embodiment of emotion, excess, thought, and actions across the warp. So if it came down to a warp battle royale, so to say, Horus would basically get dog-walked.
I hate my job.
Next up, we have the Emperor on the Golden Throne. And if I'm being completely honest, I think this is where Slaanesh stops. The Emperor is arguably the most powerful individual psyker currently active in the setting. Well, if you want to call him active. Even in his crippled state, he projects enough psychic power to sustain the Astronomicon, shield humanity from countless warp threats like the Chaos Gods, and prevent the Imperium from collapsing entirely. More importantly, he has one feat that no Chaos God can really ignore. He burned Nurgle's garden inside Nurgle's own domain, in the book Godblight. That is truly an absurd feat. In addition to this feat, we also have several statements from different rulebooks that truly show off the Emperor's prowess. For example, from the 5th edition rulebook, we have this: his immense psychic powers envelop and protect mankind across the entire galaxy. His consciousness wanders through warp space, warring against demons that inhabit it, keeping closed the doors between this world and the next. Or this statement from the 7th edition rulebook. Physically fettered, chained atop mountainous banks of machinery, the Emperor's mind stretches out through space and time, a light in the vast gulf of blackness. Should that spark of life ever be extinguished, should the throne fail in its mysterious purpose, then mankind would surely be lost. The crazy thing here is that the Emperor isn't even operating as a single focused being at this point in the setting. His power appears scattered across the galaxy, time, space, and the warp, all at once. So while he is guiding the Astronomicon, protecting humanity, holding reality together in critical spots, and constantly battling those in the warp, his power is scattered, not one whole being like the Emperor used to be. So depending on how you interpret the lore, he may effectively be contesting all 4 Chaos Gods at once, in a form that is not even whole. And despite 10,000 years of trying, the Chaos Gods still haven't broken him. Now, the legitimate question is, do we have definitive proof that the Emperor's stronger than Slaanesh? Well, not quite. The lore deliberately keeps that question frustratingly vague. But based on the evidence we have on hand, I think it's completely reasonable to place the Emperor above Slaanesh in the current setting. Slaanesh may be immensely powerful, but she isn't generally portrayed as one of the dominant members of the Ruinous Pantheon, at least since her birth. Meanwhile, the Emperor has demonstrated the ability to directly damage a Chaos God's realm, as well as influence events across the galaxy and continue fighting despite being reduced to what is essentially a glorified psychic skeleton. He's also a literal anathema to the Chaos Gods, which means he's a force that Chaos entities are instinctively repelled by, giving him a distinct advantage. So a Falling Cow's take is this: Slaanesh is close, very close, extremely close, maybe a little too close to be honest. But if I had to rank them today, I'd put the God Emperor slightly above Slaanesh. Not by a massive margin, mind you, and not because he'd easily defeat her, but because the evidence we currently have leans in the Emperor's favor. Since this is a Falling Cow video, I'll continue discussing the other entities on this pyramid just for the sake of fun and entertainment. After the God Emperor, we have the Chaos Gods, the brothers of Slaanesh. And since I don't want to spoil the full rankings on how they sit in the current setting, I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. Slaanesh is in the same bracket, operating on the same level of reality-shaping influence as the rest of the Ruinous Pantheon. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Shh. No spoilers. Now, just like with Khorne, we come to the typical Chaos Gods vs. Catan conversation. And for context, just like last time, the Catan are essentially the gods of the material universe. They represent the absolute peak of physical reality given divine form. Beings that can manipulate time, space, causality, and even erase existence on a fundamental level. Even in a fragmented form, Catan shards are still capable of absurd feats, such as displacing enemies outside of time, rewriting casual chains, and exerting control over entire star systems. To add further context, TJ the King, our resident Necron and Catan expert, in my Discord, highlighted a key passage from Deathwatch: The Outer Reach, showing just how powerful these Starboys are. The Catan unleashed such powers upon the galaxy as had not been witnessed since creation. Planets were blasted to ashes upon the cosmic winds, and stars were extinguished with but a word. Black holes were punched through the fabric of reality, and foot soldiers of the Old Ones slaughtered by the billion as a storm of Catan wrath swept the galaxy. At the last, after an epoch of slaughter, the Catan broke into the webway. The vengeful star gods glutted themselves upon the souls of the Old One's servants, and probably unknowingly, but ultimately disastrously, unleashed warp-spawn perils upon the galaxy that left the Old Ones overwhelmed and utterly defeated. So from this excerpt, we see that the Catan didn't just dominate real space, they also breached the webway. And for further context, the webway is an extra-dimensional network constructed from Wraithbone, existing between real space and the warp. It is effectively a bridge layer between two fundamental realities. So what we're seeing here is not just physical dominion, but interaction with a structure that exists between the materium and the warp. Something very few entities in 40k can even touch. However, despite all of this, we run into the same unavoidable problem that we always do when comparing the Catan to the Chaos Gods. They are fundamentally operating on a different axis of existence. The Catan are embodiments of the physical universe and its laws, while Slaanesh and the Chaos Gods are embodiments of emotion, thought, excess, and psychic reflection within the warp. One governs reality as a structure, the other governs reality as meaning. Because of that, direct comparisons become inherently unstable. You can stack feats, scale destruction, and compare cosmic level statements, but eventually the question stops being who is stronger and becomes what does strength even represent across these two realities. So while the Catan represent the peak of the materium and the Chaos Gods represent the peak of the immaterium, a clear winner between them doesn't really exist. Without forcing a framework, the setting doesn't really support. And even though I do love my power scaling, it just doesn't make sense to compare these two entities like that. They're just not designed to fit neatly into one hierarchy. They're designed to exist as opposing metaphysical truths. But once again, we come to kind of a funny truth. The full-on Catan are gone in the current setting, and they're not likely to come back. So if we're talking strictly the current setting, then Slaanesh, along with the rest of the Ruinous Pantheon, comfortably sits at the top of the multiversal tier. And with that, that's Slaanesh fully scaled and broken down across the 40k setting. Let me know down in the comments which Chaos God I should do next. Should I do the scheming purple bird boy, Zinch, or the stinky chud, Nurgle? Let me know down in the comments, herd. As always, a massive shout out to my channel members. Impossy Paul, Tyler Pick 7, Ritter S, Musty, Keydri, Seth Capizilla, Lag, Cunny Karkle, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, Jack Roar, Anish Chatterjee, and Michael Skipper 7277. I appreciate all of you more than you know. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a like and make sure to subscribe to A Falling Cow. Once I finish this Chaos Gods miniseries, I have a lot of fun videos planned, such as a fraud watch on the Avatar of Cain, dissecting the fight between Horus and the Emperor, and maybe even scaling every single variation of the Emperor across one gigantic video. Because I love giving myself more and more work. Who doesn't love being stressed out, folks? Make sure you guys are drinking your milk, eating your cookies, and staying as autistic as always. Stay milked, fellas, and you'll see me real soon.